and everything else around, and it feels like just the feeling of what you hear. And again, what you hear can be misinformation, right? Sure. Like, I think one of the things Danny Hurley talking to the Lakers, I think that was put out there by Danny Hurley's agent. To be honest, it does the Lakers no good to announce that, because they got J.J. Redick on the line in case Danny Hurley doesn't work. But they don't want to run off J.J. Redick, and they don't want the whole world knowing what they're doing. So why would you put out Danny Hurley if you're the Lakers? You wouldn't leak that. But if you're Danny Hurley's agent, you'd absolutely leak that. Let the world know that your boy's coveted by the Lakers. Let UConn know your boy's coveted by the Lakers. So information gets put out there, sometimes legit, sometimes not, because there's agendas. For an example, this coaching search. We get the names of candidates that are out there. A lot of the national guys get that from agents. I mean, some of these guys might not be interested in South Carolina, or lukewarm interest, but their agent wants to know there is some type of possibility so you can get more money from your current situation. That happened for Chris Pollard last year. After Duke was finished in the season, Miami came sniffing around Pollard. Pollard got a contract extension and some promises that Duke would invest more in the baseball program. When other people are chasing you, the person you're with sometimes, steps up their game with you. So that could be some of this as well. So who knows what's real, what's not. But I feel like the things that you hear and read, and we hear and read here, it feels like Cliff Godwin, that's a guy South Carolina has got heavy interest in. I think Monty Lee's in the mix. I think Dan McDonnell at Louisville just makes too much. I just think the money's a thing there. The buyout on Tom Walter at Wake might be a thing. Pollard could be in the mix as well. So that's kind of how it feels. I feel like, look, I said this before, I think Cliff Godwin checks every box. Except, obviously, he hasn't been to Omaha. He's been to the Supers, 4 times? So he's been close to Omaha 4 times. I believe that's off the top of my head. But he checks the boxes. He is well respected in the baseball community. The national college baseball community thinks Coach Godwin's got it going on, that he's a high-level coach and would be a great hire for anybody in the power leagues. Godwin's got results except going to Omaha. He's hit everything but kicking the door in and ending up at the College World Series. I think this fan base, from what we've been seeing, would be happy with a Coach Godwin hire. And financially, he would check a box. You don't have to pay him as much as the other guys. He's making $600,000 at East Carolina. You bumped him to $859, whatever. You're still staying under 7 digits, but Cliff got a heck of a raise. So that checks that box. That sometimes has been a box at South Carolina. I just think Godwin, for everybody's agenda, Godwin would be a fit. Thing is, does Godwin want to leave East Carolina? That's really what it comes down to. And the fact his name is still in this thing and he hasn't turned it down publicly, that means he might be considering this. The idea he hasn't said a word. Here's the quote from Cliff Godwin. So he could be considering it. And think about this, too. East Carolina's losing players in the transfer portal, really important, vital players to the program. How much of it, if you're Cliff Godwin, do you sit and say, look, I love East Carolina. I'm an alum. I grew up down the road from the school. I want to take East Carolina to the College World Series. But in the world we live in now, are we going to have a chance to compete like we are? can we be competitive in this NIL/transfer portal world? Can we come up with the right funds to keep our guys and to attract other guys? Is it now as good as it ever going to be? Is it not going to be as good because we just can't financially make this work? Maybe. Look, if you're a coach, you want the resources to compete at the highest of levels, right? You just do. And if all of a sudden, from no fault of, East Carolina, but just the fault of the world you're in, you're not going to be able to compete at that high of high levels because of the NIL/transfer portal world, and you don't have the dough, and you get guys poached by the power leagues. Now, you can poach lower, but you're losing talented players. So that could be a factor in what Cliff Godwin's thinking about. Plus the stuff we've talked about, competing in the best league in America, the SEC, coaching at a place that loves baseball, has more resources than you have, a fan base that's lathered up to get back to what they used to be. Those are all the positives, too. So we'll see. But right now, again, nothing's official. No one's officially said they're not interested. There's no word someone's turned down South Carolina. There's no word South Carolina's put out offers. Who knows where it's at right now? I just feel like looking at all the candidates that Coach Godwin in East Carolina is the guy that hits all the agendas. And we're going to talk to Nate Summers, covers East Carolina, or covered East Carolina, now a sports editor in Greenville, North Carolina. We're going to talk to him at 12:30 and get his thoughts on Godwin. Would he leave? What's the NIL scene like for East Carolina? All that stuff. We'll kind of get the lowdown as much as we can from the perspective of what the folks are thinking at East Carolina. That's coming at the bottom of the hour, 12:30. So we'll get to that. But I just feel like that's the direction it feels like now. Is Godwin going to take it? I don't know. Again, he loves East Carolina. He has not wanted to leave. He has turned down overtures in the past. But again, we have not heard Cliff Godwin say he's not interested in South Carolina. Matter of fact, he's not saying anything. Might be the old Cliff's gone dark. And that would mean, if that is true, and I don't know if it's true or not, I'm just saying, haven't heard a quote from him. If that is true, it means he is considering this job. That would just be my perspective. Well, like I said, Nate Summers will talk with us, give us the East Carolina point of view on this whole story coming up bottom of the hour, 12:30. And we will find out more there. We're also going to take a look as well. We're continuing our little run through the quarterback tiers in college football. ESPN put up, looking at the SEC quarterbacks, digging up some interesting stuff for those tiers we're going to share with you in the 1 o'clock hour as we go football, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. We'll get into that because it is interesting stuff. Also, the South Carolina football, we know the College Football Power Index came out by ESPN. We're going to take a look at the schedule and just from that ranking, what teams on the schedule rank higher than South Carolina, which ones rank lower. And then we'll look at that with home and road and just kind of get the idea of what the College Football Power or Football Index would say about wins and losses for the South Carolina schedule in 2024. So we got that coming up as well. A lot of cool stuff we'll do. And, of course, Ed Bird's here. He brought candy. And I killed those yesterday. Ed, gone. I binged them. Tom, I'll have to go into Werther's rehab by the time we finish this up. So Ed Bird's here to punch the controls and keep us going steady. And we'll be doing that till 3. The craft beer card, we still have it going. 12 craft beer locations. $30 a brewery. That's $360 you would spend, but instead you can just spend $79 and get the craft beer card. That saves you a lot of money. Go to 1075thegame.com. Click on Sweet Deals. We'll be doing one of our craft beer roadies live shows next week at Angry Fish. The post-game show with Jay and Elijah will be out there again. That's next Thursday from 3 to 6 in Lexington. Come hang out. Angry Fish is a cool spot. We were there last year. That's good times. We'll get back in here. Take a look at the SEC And just where do these coaches come from? I believe 9 coaches in the SEC have been to Omaha, current coaches. So where did they, were they an assistant at another program? Were they a head coach somewhere else? Where was the origin of these guys before they showed up in the spots they're in now? We'll get into that next. Just kind of give you a lay of the land, just kind of where different coaches come from and the level of success, and is there anything we can take from it? And it might be nothing, to be quite honest, but let's do that dance coming up next. Halftime show, Terry Ford, Ed Bird, up until 3 here on the game. All right, halftime show. Terry Ford, glad you could be hanging out with us as we roll up until 3 on the game. Nate Summers from The Reflector in Greenville, North Carolina, sports editor. Used to cover East Carolina baseball for 10-plus years. Will jump on with us bottom of the hour to discuss the Greenville perspective of Cliff Godwin and what could his interest be in leaving the Pirate baseball program to come to South Carolina. Real quick, and we might start this and then catch back up on it later because we want to give Nate as much time as possible. So when you look at, and I typed them all out on my computer too. I got to move it closer. There's a reflection off of it. You can see on Game TV. That's what we do. Hey, how you doing? Good seeing you. That's over here. There we go. All right. If you look at the Southeastern Conference, I just started there. And the coaches in the Southeastern Conference, 9 of them have some type of prior head coaching experience. One was JUCO, to be fair. And that was Butch Thompson at Auburn, was head coach on the JUCO level, got to the Junior College World Series, then went on the assistant trail after that, and then ended up the head coach at Auburn. And, of course, Thompson's been to 2 College World Series. Tim Corbin was the head coach at Presbyterian when they were going from NAIA to NCAA. So he was the head coach during that transition for Presbyterian. Then Corbin left and started becoming an assistant coach. His last stop as an assistant was Clemson before he took off for Vanderbilt. The other 7 were all head coaching stops. Like, for an example, Jay Johnson was at Nevada and Arizona, took Arizona to the College World Series. Mike Bianco was at McNeese State. Jim Schlossnagle, UNLV, and, of course, went to the College World Series multiple times at TCU before landing at A&M, and he's been at the College World Series at A&M. Dave Van Horn took Nebraska to the College World Series, also as a head coach at Northwestern State, Central Missouri State. Chris Lemonis was a head coach at Indiana. Rob Vaughn was a head coach at Maryland. And, of course, Carrick Jackson, first-year head coach at Missouri, was a head coach at Southern and Memphis. Now, the assistants who took gigs with no prior head coaching experience at all was Kevin O'Sullivan. He was an assistant Virginia and Clemson. Tony Vitello was an assistant in the SEC at multiple stops, was Vitello. Remember, he played at Missouri. Then Vitello was an assistant at Mizzou, TCU, and Arkansas before he took over Tennessee. Wes Johnson's resume is ridiculous as an assistant. Wes was an assistant, Dallas Baptist, Mississippi State, Arkansas, was pitching coach of the Minnesota Twins, came back, was an assistant at LSU, and now is a head man at Georgia. Nick Mangione was an assistant at Kentucky, West Carolina, and Mississippi State before Nick took the gig at Kentucky. Interesting, all 4 of those guys are in the Super. Just saying. So it's just there's more guys who had head coaching experience who now have head coaching gigs in the SEC, but the 4 guys we just went over who never were head coaches before have also performed quite well in the SEC. Guys who have been to Omaha: Tim Corbin, Kevin O'Sullivan, Jay Johnson, Mike Bianco, Tony Vitello, Jim Schlossnagle, Dave Van Horn, Chris Lemonis, Butch Thompson. 9 of them. And this year you have, coaches who haven't been to Omaha: Johnson and our boy Nick at Kentucky, who are in the Supers, which obviously 1 step away from Omaha. That's the resume of guys in the SEC. Yeah, think about it. Again, Butch Thompson's been to the College World Series twice. Auburn was awful this year. Awful. So you see, typically if you look at these lists, you have guys, the assistants we talked about with the 4 who weren't college head coaches. Corbin was successful getting Presbyterian into the NCAA before he went the assistant route. Jay Johnson was very successful at Arizona. Mike Bianco was head coach at McNeese State and did a good job there. Got him to basically to Ole Miss. Schlossnagle, fantastic at TCU. Van Horn, great job at Nebraska, getting the Cornhuskers to the College World Series before he landed at Arkansas. Lemonis, solid at Indiana. Indiana was a good program before Lemonis got there. They went to the College World Series before Lemonis got there. And Chris got to the NCAAs. He just never made to Omaha at Indiana. Rob, I mean, again, the guys who haven't done this stuff yet, Rob Vaughn only 1 year at Alabama, got to the, regionals at Maryland a couple times. So these are guys who had success in some way, shape, or form, some of them big success before they showed up in the SEC. So again, there's no real rhyme or reason to it except either you were an assistant at a Power 5 level or Power 4, whatever we're calling it today, or you were a head coach and you were having some level of success, obviously, before you landed in the SEC. That's kind of the breakdown of all these guys. What does it mean? I don't know if you really get a pattern of anything. The assistants with no experience have worked, guys who have head coach experience have worked. It all goes back to hiring the right guy. Just be honest. That's where it's at. I mean, the guys with no coaching experience, O'Sullivan was a very respected assistant. Vitello, a very respected assistant. Wes Johnson's resume is sick as an assistant. And so was Nick at Kentucky. So good resumes as assistant. Like I just talked about this because of Elander at Tennessee. He's a guy that's looked at as a high-level assistant someone's going to hire as a head coach. He's a young guy. He's in his early 30s. But he's a dude that's going to get a gig at some point because he's been very, very instrumental in the success Tony Vitello has had at Tennessee. So there's a little breakdown of what's going on regarding where these managers have come from in resumes in the SEC. All right, Mitch Light from The Athletic was on with Jay and Elijah yesterday on the postgame show. Talked about a variety of things with college baseball. Mitch was asked, how is the South Carolina job perceived nationally? This is cut one there, Redbird. Fire it up.
It's a great question, Jay. And I was thinking about that earlier because obviously a decade ago you would put South Carolina, I don't know if the best job in the SEC, but clearly in that very small tier. I think we're at the stage of college baseball now where almost every SEC job is in that upper tier. Now with NIL, basically every school's fully funded almost. And I know every schools have different NIL packages and all that, but I think the right coach can win big at every SEC job. We're seeing Kentucky in the Supers shared the SEC title. We've seen we've seen Auburn jump up and go to the College World Series 2 times in the previous 4 years before this year. I don't think that takes away from the South Carolina job at all. It's still an elite job. It's just not in a tier of its own or in the top 2 or 3. I still think they will attract a very, very good coach. I think there's some good candidates out there. I mean, not that I'm making the decision, but I always like to go. It's funny. I'm going to contradict myself because I think I'd like to go with a guy who's proven he can win in a power conference and recruit and do all that stuff and navigate the NIL waters and the transfer portal waters. But a lot of the best coaches, and this is going back, but a lot of the most successful coaches in the SEC were hired as assistants. Mm-hmm. Again, maybe this is going back too far, but Kevin O'Sullivan at Florida, Tim Corbin at Vanderbilt, Dan McConnell, I know it's not the SEC, but at ACC. I believe he was an Ole Miss assistant. Mm-hmm. And Mike Bianco was an Ole Miss assistant. Again, these are guys that have been around for decades. But it just kind of shows there's no proven path. If you're a good coach in the right situation, you're going to win. Yeah,
I mean, that's just that you just hire the right guy. That's really what it comes down. Nobody knew if Tony Vitello was going to be the right guy. But to be fair, I mean, Chris Lemonis had done a nice job at Indiana, but he hadn't made it to Omaha at Indiana in his, 4 years there, I think? But he had been in the NCAAs, and your thought was this guy's a really good coach. What is he going to do if he gets the resources that you could get in Starkville, Mississippi? He's got to hire the right guy. That's the thing. Look, Coach Kingston just wasn't the guy to get South Carolina where South Carolina wants to be. Mark Kingston, like I said, will go off and be a good coach somewhere else. He'll have winning records. He'll make the NCAA tournament probably more times than not. But when your expectation is getting to Omaha, this program was not there. It's not simple. You want a guy who is going to get you there. And like we said, someone who's been there already, the miss rate of that guy is considered lower than the more unknown. But it doesn't mean, look, nobody knew what Kevin O'Sullivan was going to do. Turned out Florida's quite happy, right? Or Tony Vitello. So you just got to get the right guy. And that's a lame answer, but it really is true. And we kind of went over how all these guys showed up at their spots. You know, it's going to be one of those routes. Either you're gonna grab a guy that's got a good resume that you say, yep. Like, again, we'll go with Cliff Godwin for an example. Been to multiple supers at East Carolina. What could he do with the resources and the backing that he gets here at South Carolina? Your thought is, okay, that dude should be able to take the ride to Omaha. Is it a guarantee? Of course not. You get guys like Tom Walter at Wake. He's been there. You know he can get there. Your thought is you got a higher percentage chance of success with that guy. But is it guaranteed? Of course not. None of it is. Monty Lee, you're going to get a winning record, and a guy that has been to the NCAA tournament 8 times in 13 years. You know that. You know you get that. But only been to one super, never been to Omaha. But who knows? Right fit, third time's a charm. Who knows? That could be the right way to go. That's why Ray Tanner gets paid the big money. Make that decision. We've talked about what I think, what I would do if I got to pick that gig. Every host here is kind of giving you their thought of what they would do. But, obviously, Coach Tanner, he's got to get it right. I will come back in here, talk to Nate Summers, sports editor at The Reflector in Greenville, South Carolina, get his thoughts on Cliff Godwin and the possibility of Godwin taking the South Carolina baseball gig. Terry Ford, Ed Bird, halftime show till 3 on the game. What we're talking about, obviously, is the South Carolina head coaching search for the new baseball coach. We appreciate you hanging out with us, whether you're here in Columbia at 107.5 or any of our affiliates, 100.5 The Game in Florence, 100.3 The Game in Myrtle Beach. Get a little insight. Cliff Godwin's name has popped up a ton here in the last few days. The very successful head baseball coach at East Carolina. To get a little background, could Cliff Godwin end up at South Carolina? Or maybe, again, East Carolina's alma mater. He's turned down plenty of opportunities in the past, so we'll see where that's at. I'm going to talk to Nate Summers from The Reflector in Greenville, North Carolina, sports editor there, covered East Carolina baseball for over a decade, at Nate Sum99 on Twitter, X, or wherever the hell it's called these days. Nate, we appreciate your time, my friend. Thanks for hopping in.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. So I guess the first question, Nate, is this dance is going on with Cliff Godwin. You know, power conference teams have sniffed around Godwin many different times, and Cliff always wants to stay at his alma mater. This one any different?
You know, it's tough when a coach manages to stay around for a decade, especially at their alma mater. You know, it's one of those things. Does that make it more likely that he'll leave or less likely? You know, the overriding thing that's different now, though, that you know, even is different from a year ago or 2 years ago, or, you know, dating back to when, you know, he first started getting some SEC interest. I feel like even after that second season, I think it was maybe the Alabama job. So that has been like a kind of a constant backdrop, I feel like, in the offseason. But it is different now. You know, the power of NIL, power of the transfer portal, you know, changed everything in college sports. But, you know, if you're East Carolina, it creates what's going to be a really tough battle every single year. And so the question is, does Cliff want to keep fighting that battle? You know, a lot of people here are speculating that the huge losses that East Carolina has had this week in the transfer portal already, you know, a lot of people hear that and they say, oh, well, Cliff's leaving. That's why, you know, that's what we don't know. And they know that behind closed doors. And a lot of people are speculating that this huge exodus that we've had this week is because Cliff is leaving. But I think it might just be the reality that this is going to be every year. I mean, the basketball team here just went through the same thing, and that wasn't because the coach was leaving. That was because the transfer portal is a free-for-all. And so, you know, I think maybe if Cliff doesn't want to fight that battle of rebuilding his team every year and wants to maybe have a little bit more of an advantage and be able to leverage some NIL money at the kids he's recruiting, he would have to at some point take that leap. So, you know, I guess that's my general analysis of it to this point.
Nate Summers with us, sports editor for The Reflector in Greenville, North Carolina, talking about Cliff Godwin. Right now, the East Carolina baseball coach. There's a lot of rumors that Cliff is one of the main targets for the South Carolina vacancy. Halftime show, Terry Ford, Ed Bird here on the game. Nate, let's go to the NIL situation, obviously, at East Carolina. Look, mid-majors, you know, group of five, whatever you want to call what East Carolina is, whatever bucket you want to put them in. And obviously, it's not like the power conference NIL coffers, but what is the NIL situation at East Carolina?
Well, I think it's what it is at a lot of places, that they've raised a lot of money. I mean, you know, my email is constantly, you know, getting hit with releases from ECU saying that some name fill in the blank has donated $100,000 or $1 million or whatever. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head where those coffers are, but it's not, I don't think, going to ever be comparable. I don't think anything that has come with NIL has changed. You know, it certainly hasn't leveled the playing field in any way. I mean, sure, you know, this person or that person can, you know, that's a deep pocket somewhere could donate $20 million to Middle Tennessee or somebody, and they could hit it rich. But I think most of, you know, if you're not in a Power 5 conference, you know, you're not gaining anything through NIL. And I mean, yes, they've built some money up for sure. And of course that helps, but I just don't know that you're able to do anything different than the guy next to you, basically. And, you know, the way that it's always been since long before NIL, since it was about TV money or whatever. I mean, the group of five leagues, you know, are always kind of in a scramble to keep track of all the changes financially. So, the NIL situation I think is pretty decent here by comparison. But again, I don't think you can compete with kids that might want to go to the SEC, or in this case, a coach that might want to do that, just to have that advantage.
And Nate, I mean, baseball in the pecking order at East Carolina. If someone has no idea about anything about East Carolina, but they're in the state of North Carolina, the pecking order of baseball in support and resources given. And look, it's never like football. We get it, but where is it at in the overall athletic program at East Carolina?
Well, I think in terms of support and in terms of how the university, I think, sells it on the bigger stage. It would be right there, but it's the same reality here that it is everywhere. If you look at actual revenue, even in a losing season, the basketball teams generate more money. Baseball is that way, obviously, almost everywhere. If you, like you said, if you compare it to football, it's obviously not even close. Football generates almost all of the money. And again, I don't know that I see anything that's happening in the landscape of college sports changing that for ECU or anybody else in the American Conference, or again, anybody in the framework of the Group of Five. But in terms of fan interest, it's right there. Obviously, it's got to be competing with men's basketball, behind football for interest. I think this is definitely a town where the football team, its impact and its interest level is substantially higher than it is, certainly over men's basketball. Fans hang their interest on winners too, and that's something that ECU baseball has always had, at least since I've been around, is that they've always been the team that people can rally around because they're always in the postseason and they always have a winning record. That's almost never true, at least again, comparing to what since I've been around. It's almost never true for men's basketball. So, people back a winner. So it does get backed a lot here.
Nate Summers, sports editor at The Reflector in Greenville, North Carolina, covered ECU for 10-plus years, hanging out with us, giving us a little insight on ECU head baseball coach Cliff Godwin here on the Halftime Show on the Game. All right, if someone doesn't know anything about Cliff Godwin, give us about a minute and a half of the man, Cliff Godwin.
He's an old school guy, a tough guy. I mean, he's a disciple of Keith LeClaire, who's, a renowned, figure in this community and this area. And he's cut from that same cloth. He's a super hard-nosed guy. He's a little gruff sometimes with the media. But, a genuinely good guy. And, I think kids react to him. I don't know that every modern athlete that's seeking NIL money, though, and maybe not getting it right away, may not fit into the, Cliff Godwin way of thinking. But the guy knows baseball front to back. He understands that, I think, at every level. He certainly is putting guys into the pros and developing guys. They're about to have a first-round draft pick in their starting pitcher, Trey Savage. So the guy knows how to develop talent 100%.
All right, Nate, last thing. Take your 7-figure nest egg, the Nate Summers savings account that's going to take care of you for the rest of your life, and you're going to bet it. Where is Cliff Godwin coaching baseball next season?
Whew, man. I guess there's a reason that I don't have that kind of a nest egg. This would be a great indication of that. I'm gonna, I'll side with he's back. He's here. He's in Greenville, North Carolina. That said, I wouldn't be stunned if this were the, maybe just again, given the landscape of things, given the volatile atmosphere and the huge gap between Group of Five and Power Five. It wouldn't stun me if this was the time he took a leap.
All right, Nate Summers, sports editor from The Reflector in Greenville, North Carolina, at NateSum99. We appreciate your time. If things start to cook and it gets, this thing gets even bigger, we might bug you again, my friend.
No problem. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Nate. You have a good one now. Enjoy your weekend, man. All right, we'll see you now. All right, we'll come back here at Firehouse Subtext the hour, 803-404-6100. Halftime show. Terry Ford, Ed Bird, going up until the top, until 3 o'clock. Not just top of this hour, but up until 3 on the Game. Time for our Firehouse subtext, the hour 803-446-6100. This is a good one. This is from an ECU grad who's lived here in Chapin for 20 years and loves it. His text, it would be interesting if Cliff Godwin goes to USC, as Eric Bakich and Cliff both played together at ECU and both wore number 23 to honor Keith LeClaire. Not sure he would come, but would not be surprised if he did. Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this in the opening riff of the show, and we just heard Nate Summers, for the sports editor of The Reflector in Greenville, South Carolina, or North Carolina, talk about it as well. The world has changed. If you're Cliff Godwin at East Carolina and you're seeing important players on your baseball team jump in the transfer portal, not because they don't like playing for you, but because of NIL dough, and you know you can't match that NIL dough, and you're losing players not because your program isn't successful or because you're not a good baseball coach, but over factors you can't control, money. How frustrating does that make it for you? Do you want to fight this uphill battle every year of keeping a roster together when you're losing key pieces just because you can't offer them the same bag of NIL money as, the power leagues can? Do you want to continue going down that road? Because that's a fight. You're pushing that boulder up the hill every year. Or do you want to go to a power league where you'll have that advantage? That's a real thing here with these coaches. Because all coaches are obviously competitive as all get out. They want to win, man. And if you're all of a sudden going to be in the fight with one hand tied behind your back financially, how frustrated are you going to be? How frustrated is Godwin now seeing, 4 at least players jumping in the portal that, are very important to what East Carolina has done? And, do you just throw your hands up and go, are you serious? I love my alma mater. Love being at East Carolina, but I want a chance to win. I want an opportunity to get to the highest level I can. That's why I'm in the business. And now if it's going to turn and it's going to be very difficult to do it at the place I love, I got to reevaluate. And this could be the tipping point for Godwin at East Carolina. So we'll see. But very good text. And yes, look, East Carolina has a long, long tradition of winning when it comes to baseball. And Cliff Godwin has definitely put his stamp on that program. But he might look around, I just can't do this. I can't. You know what I'm going to do? Go get a title loan on my car, call 1-800-GOT-MONEY or whatever. What are we going to do here? We can't compete in the NIL space with the power leagues. So we'll see. And that could be a factor in this. Absolutely. Appreciate the text there. And we'll do another Firehouse subtext the hour at 803-404-6100, about an hour from now. All right, our Twitter poll, we have now reached the end. We've gotten to the end. Our final baseball candidate Twitter poll, we did 3. And we took the winners of those 3 and put them into our final candidate bracket. Here are the 4 coaches who won the 3 previous polls, and we did have a tie. Chris Lemonis yesterday, he won, edging out Landon Powell. Cliff Godwin won our first one, beating out Monty Lee. Josh Elander, the Tennessee assistant head coach, and Chris Pollard, the head coach at Duke, tied. So these 4 are in. Right now, 164 votes. Still have 23 hours left on this poll. Cliff Godwin is in first place, 46% of the vote. Josh Elander, the Tennessee assistant, at 29%. Chris Pollard, Duke head coach, at 19%. Chris Lemonis, Mississippi State head coach, at 6%. Do have a good one here on Twitter. We love your responses. Here's 4 quick responses. One is Tom Walter, who lost to Cliff Godwin in the first one. The other one is Monty Lee, my write-in candidate. And the other 2, we don't have in there, none of the above. So that's where we're at. And we thank you all the time for your voting on the poll, viewing the poll, giving us a response about the topic. We do appreciate it very much. And already over 1,000 people have taken a look in the first hour. So thank you so much for that. We do greatly appreciate it. But that's our finalist. And maybe one of yours didn't win the first round bracket, whether it's Tom Walter, Monty Lee, Landon Powell. Walter didn't even finish second, I don't think. Walter was a distant third. I'm a huge Tom Walter guy. What he's done at Wake, what he did at New Orleans, I mean, he's a program builder. He's, that pitching lab that they set up at Wake Forest has changed the program in a lot of ways. To me, that's why Chase Burns went to Wake, to jump in the pitching lab. And it worked out pretty well for old Chase. So thank you very much for your votes, and we'll check back into it next hour, see where it's at, and also we'll revisit our Firehouse subtext the hour. Coming up, football, and, dash of baseball in there if we need to, here in the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors, here on the Halftime Show with Terry Ford, Ed Bird, here on The Game. Halftime show, Terry Ford, Ed Bird, David Dare's trolling the producer room. I don't know, is there honey buns in there or something? I mean, what's the deal there with Dave? Don't trust him. Keep an eye on him, Ed. Keep an eye on him. I'm scared to just Google for fun David Dare. Just see what happens. Probably take you to the dark web, all sorts of craziness. God knows will start coming up on my feeds. Anyway, we are here, football, 1 o'clock hour here on the game. I do want to circle back to something really quick we didn't get a chance to, baseball related. About the time our show popped, Chris Clark, Gamecock Central, put an update on his thoughts on the baseball coaching search. I want to get this out to you now. We'll re-rack it again in an hour, but just give you some of the thoughts that Chris Clark had real quick. Per multiple industry sources, Louisville's Dan McDonnell is no longer in the mix for the job here in Columbia. Chris doesn't have any other further details. It won't be Dan McDonnell. I just think, look, does Dan McDonnell want to stay at Louisville? I don't know, because we talked to Drew Diener from 93.9 The Ville and 680 ESPN Louisville, and Drew said that, McDonnell is not happy with the NIL situation at Louisville, nor is McDonnell happy with the commitment to baseball. So my guess is, unless Louisville has changed a lot of things here in the last week to accommodate Dan McDonnell, it's probably about money. McDonnell's making 1.3. For McDonnell to leave, it's probably going to be 1.5, 1.6. Plus, there's a buyout involved. So I'm guessing, and maybe it's more than 1.5 or 1.6 McDonnell wants. I don't know. I haven't talked to Dan. I feel like it's a financial, just not on the same page financially is my guess. I could be wrong. Could be something else. Also from Chris, many Gamecock Central subscribers have asked about Wake Forest Tom Walter. We didn't mention him in our last update simply because we don't have much info yet, but he is in the mix. I've had some folks in the baseball community tell me Walter has been very intrigued about getting into the SEC. And that's something that, that's been whispered. That Walter, again, he wants more resources. There's a ceiling at Wake. There just is. Like Wake Forest, is, when it comes to, the power leagues, in a lot of metrics, is at the low end of the totem pole. Finances, just a bunch of stuff. And I'm sure that, Tom Walter would get a lot more resources in, the SEC than he's getting at Wake. So that would make sense. Other names that Chris previously mentioned, Duke's Chris Pollard, East Carolina's Chris Godwin, or Cliff Godwin, I keep wanting to say Chris Godwin, Cliff Godwin, plus current interim coach Monty Lee are all still in the mix, according to what Chris hears. There could be other names in there too, but these are the ones we know have been involved in the search. And Chris also says, the field has narrowed. I anticipate it will continue to narrow in the coming hours. To reiterate, I don't think South Carolina wants to drag this out for a long time. So we'll continue to look for updates on the head coaching search. I want to get that out there before we moved on to football, because I just saw this. It popped a little bit after our show started. All right, South Carolina football. If you look at the ESPN PFI, the Power Index, and you look at where teams are ranked, and then you look at South Carolina's schedule, let's mess around a little bit. First of all, the college football PFI on ESPN has South Carolina basically at 6-6. That's in their metric, that's the predictor for South Carolina. Now, in Shane's 3 years, first 2 years, South Carolina beat the projections. Last year, they were probably right at the projections. A lot of these projectors, like the FPI, had South Carolina at like 5 wins. All right, so let's look. South Carolina is 33rd in the PFI. So let's look at the schedule. Who is ranked worse than South Carolina? Old Dominion at 108. Kentucky barely at 34. Vandy at 76. Obviously, Wofford's an FCS school. And Akron at 128. So there's 4 that South Carolina is ranked ahead of. And this shows you the difficulty of the Gamecock schedule. The teams they are ranked behind in the FPI: LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Missouri, Clemson. That's 7. So if you go by the 6-6 prediction, and you see here that South Carolina is rated ahead of 5 teams, but behind 7, that means South Carolina is going to beat someone whose FPI number is better than theirs. And you always think, okay, home games, right? Because you're playing at home, you get LSU at home. LSU is breaking in new quarterbacks, some new receivers. They're trying to get their defense better because it was abysmal last year. Ole Miss comes in. I mean, people love Ole Miss. This is the most expectation Ole Miss has had maybe since Archie Manning was the quarterback. So Ole Miss comes in, with a lot of thunder, conceivably, right? Texas A&M. Who knows what Texas A&M will be under Mike Elko? Big, huge unknown. But the Aggies have talent, but they've had talent for years. It's like, you always put those little, slogans and stuff up when you're running out of your locker room or into your tunnel or whatever. I think A&M's is something like underachieve. Because that's what they've done for a long time. But they are ranked 14th in the FPI. Also coming to town is Missouri, ranked 10th. Now, again, Missouri, double-digit win season last year, have a good amount of important pieces coming back, but they have lost some, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So we'll see if Missouri's as good as they were last year. Was that an outlier with old Eli last year? And Clemson's at 15. Clemson 2 years ago, South Carolina beat Clemson in Death Valley. Last year, Clemson beat South Carolina here, despite the fact they didn't score an offensive touchdown. And right now, Clemson doesn't feel like the Clemson they've been under Dabo. So if you look at home game, that game's at Clemson. My bad. But Wofford's here, Missouri's here, A&M's here, Akron, Ole Miss, LSU, Old Dominion. Out of those, look, we don't know if Missouri's going to continue to be as good as they were last year. They have no clue. They have had South Carolina's number under Eli. We don't know about A&M under Mike Elko, a gigantic underachieving program. Last year, remember, South Carolina went to College Station and hung around in that game against A&M. But Texas A&M, again, made plays early fourth quarter to mid-fourth quarter to where they won that game. South Carolina got smacked hard at Missouri early in that game against the Tigers, but got themselves back together after a couple of punches to the lower region. And then if you maybe would have scored a couple touchdowns instead of kicking a bunch of field goals, you might have been in that one too at the end. LSU shows up. Look, LSU's got a boatload of talent, but there are some unknowns there. But Brian Kelly's a heck of a coach. Just is. And Ole Miss people think Ole Miss is going to be a juggernaut this year. We'll see. So if you look at those games, like Missouri and A&M, out of the home games where the teams have a higher power rating, Missouri and A&M could be gettable because you have some question marks there. Even with Missouri winning 10 games. I don't know if I buy into Eli. He had a good year. God love him. I don't know. We'll see. But you got to get a couple of those, right? And that's with the idea that you beat the teams that you're ahead of in the power ranking. The Kentucky game is in Lexington. You're both about even in the PFI. But you've had Kentucky's number here recently. You got 2 in a row. One there, one here. They're breaking in a new quarterback again. They don't seem to be as good as they've been in the past few years when you have beaten them. So that feels like one you can get even though it's on the road. The other one, you got some roadies, though, man. At Bama, at Oklahoma. You're at Vandy. That'll be a win. Better be, right? So you have 2 real tough, and then you go to Clemson, but you won there 2 years ago. So the 6-6 could also be, you're going to beat Kentucky, you're going to beat Vanderbilt, you're going to get 2 road wins, right? And then you're going to beat Old Dominion at home, you're going to beat Wofford at home, beat Akron at home. So where do you get the 1? Do you get a Missouri? Do you get an A&M at home? Do you go on the road and beat Clemson like you did 2 years ago? Do you see the 6-6? It's floating in there, right? It's not inconceivable. Or maybe you do better. I mean, who knows? Shane exceeded expectations his first 2 years. So much of this is on Lenore's sellers. Sorry, Lenore's. It just is. And the offensive line. I feel like defensively, they found something the last month of the season last year. Now, again, you have to do it against good offenses consistently. But it felt like the defense trended in a good direction at the end of last year. And I feel like they've added pieces on the first two levels of that defense to where they can be consistently stout. You know, obviously there's a question at corner. But I feel as good about the defense as I have in my 3 years here. Offensively, though, it all starts with an offensive line. And then an unproven quarterback with a ton of potential. So, yeah, 6-6 is doable. I mean, it could be better. God forbid it's another 5-7. Nobody wants to see that, including, the guy sitting in the head coach's office. So that's just kind of a look at the schedule, breaking down, looking at the FPI rankings for all these teams. As, again, we're in talking season. SEC Media Days will be next month. Get to summer camp, then in August, and then it gets going at the end of August with Old Dominion. All right, so that's just a little trip around the schedule using the college football power index from ESPN. All right, we'll get back in. We talk football here in the 1 o'clock hour. Very interesting story out in Nebraska. Their AD was talking to some collective folks. Very interesting things that were said. We'll roll that by you next. And also, we appreciate it if you download the 107.5 The Game app. You can do it either Google Play, iTunes, whatever. And then wherever there's cell service, you can listen to 107.5 The Game. All right, we'll come back. Thoughts on the NIL and other things in the future of college football from the new Nebraska athletic director. It's interesting stuff. We'll pop on it in our next segment. Halftime show, Terry Ford, Ed Bird, right here on The Game. It's football in the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. Terry Ford, happy you could be hanging out with us today as we roll through till 3 o'clock on the game. And we'll get back to our baseball conversation, top of the hour. We gave you some of Chris Clark's thoughts just a few minutes ago. He had just posted a new article on Gamecock Central with his thoughts on the baseball search right now. Again, Dan McDonald, Louisville, from all sources, according to Chris, out of the running. Again, my guess is that's finances. That's just McDonald wants, you're making 1.3 at Louisville, and plus there's going to be a buyout involved there in some way, shape, or form, and who knows what McDonald wants. But it might be just too rich for the South Carolina blood at this point. I could be wrong. It could be something else, but that's just my guess off the top of my head. We'll get back to that conversation top of the hour, what's trending at 2, sponsored by Traditions Fine Jewelry and Gamecock Traditions. All right, the athletic director at Nebraska, the new athletic director, Troy Dannon, who was at Washington before coming to Nebraska, was speaking to the 1890 Initiative. That is the collective that supports Nebraska's NIL efforts. Dannon told those folks how he thinks the next 2 years in college athletics are going to play out in light of the House versus NCAA settlement. Quote from Troy Dannon, "Let me tell you something about NIL. It's not going to last forever. Here's what I think is going to happen, and I'm pretty sure I'm right," Dannon said in the video. "There will be an antitrust settlement this year in the courts. Part of the antitrust settlement, 1890, the Nebraska collective, is going to be banned. Collectives will go away. What's going to be replaced is athletic departments, revenue sharing with our athletes. In the budget of our athletic department right now, we have $20 million placeholder in 2 years to share money with our athletes. It's in the budget right now. There's 3 schools in this country, I think, that have that in their budgets right now: Georgia, Texas, and us. Our boy Troy's naming names. So right now, Georgia, Texas, and Nebraska have $20 million a year for 2 years in place. I thought that's what Texas A&M was doing. Remember, we heard that talk from Texas A&M's athletic department. They were laying off folks so they could put the money together to be ready to pay players. But right now, according to Troy Dannon, AD at Washington, Georgia, Texas, and Nebraska have $20 million a year for the next 2 years set aside to pay athletes. Here's more from Troy Dannon. We got great advantages here in Nebraska. We don't have debt. We have great reserves. We have a fan base. Interesting way to say it. Facilities. We have great advantages to addressing what lies ahead. Let's talk about what happens in the next 2 years. NIL's not coming in-house. It's going to be replaced by something else. At Washington, our football program last year had an NIL budget of about $10 million. We went to the national championship game. Oregon is at $23 million. Ohio State at $23 million. Here at Nebraska, ours isn't even $10 million. Okay, so if you're Troy Dannon, are you just have maybe, I don't know, way too much scotch? Or are you saying this to build up the NIL coffers? But why would you say that? Because according to you, NIL is going away in 2 years anyway. Or are you saying for these next 2 years, or for as long as you're around as a collective, we need you to pony up more dough? Here's more from Troy. We have the facilities, we have the coaches, we have the fans. In the next couple of years, we'll be fighting an even fight. Right now, we're not fighting an even fight. Boom. There it is. Hey, I love this idea. Ready? Hey, in 2 years, you're going to be gone. But until then, can you give us a lot of money? Can you raise some dough? I mean, you're in 2 years, but until then, can you hook a brother up? We need you. We don't even have $10 million in NIL. We need more. And then in a couple of years, when the antitrust thing gets settled and we just start paying athletes out of the athletic department, you NIL folks can kick rocks. Interesting. The other thing I would love to know about this, How does Troy Dannon know that NILs will truly become illegal? Is there going to be NIL police? NIL SWAT? Is there going to be a government agency like the ATF that's going to specialize in busting the NILs, the illegals? How's that happen? Look, in a perfect world, do you get your house in order? College athletics? Sure. I think you do. But this idea, and let's go back to the original premise of this whole post, because I'm highly entertained by Troy Dannon. He says there will be an antitrust settlement in the courts. I mean, there is one. I mean, well, no, I shouldn't say that. There is a settlement for House versus the NCAA. But what is this antitrust settlement in the courts that you speak of? What does that entail? You're saying about paying athletes for the athletic department. Are you saying there'll be an antitrust settlement and the courts will, again, do the dirty work for the NCAA to fix this mess? Or are you saying there'll be an antitrust settlement in the courts and then you will sit down and put together an agreement between all important parties in college athletics, sort of like would be a CBA if you had a union, which we're not saying you will, but do you put an agreement in place that all parties will have to agree to, get ratified, take it to the notary, and you go from there? Which direction are we talking about? Again, if you're asking the courts, you suck in court. You are over. You are the Washington Generals, like we keep saying. What makes you think anything's going to get settled in court for you? Maybe it will. I don't know. But that's what Troy's saying in 2 years is going to happen. Now, if you're going to say the courts are going to have, there's going to be an antitrust settlement through the courts, and then you're just going to pay players out of the athletic department budget, and NILs will be banned and outlawed, and it'll be sort of like, going back to the 1930s and Prohibition. NIL people hiding in speakeasies with Tommy guns. Open that little thing on the door. What's the password? Or are you saying that an antitrust settlement in court will lead to a collectively bargained agreement with players, universities, conferences? I don't know, bring the TV networks in. I mean, they run sports anyway. Which direction are you saying this is going? But whatever direction you say, you're telling us the NILs will be gone. I don't believe that. I don't believe they'll be illegal. I mean, again, you've opened a door. How do they evolve? How do they morph into something else? Or let's say old Troy's right. Maybe the NIL's going away. It would just go back under the table. Back rooms, dark alleys, whatever, handshake hundreds. It's not going, that type of stuff is not going away. Let's say every athletic department has $20 million. Do you think there's never been a level playing field ever in college athletics? Ever. And there's no way this will be a level playing field either. There will still be money in some way, shape, or form funneled to athletes, whether it's legal, illegal, whatever. And NIL is the thing with name, image, and likeness. Let's go with that too. Let's just say you have some kind of settlement, antitrust, and you're paying $20 million a year from your athletic department for athletes. NIL, real NIL, what NIL is supposed to be, that's not going away. A player can still go out and use his name, image, and likeness to be able to side hustle. I don't think that goes away at all because, again, that is legal through the courts. Unless you're thinking you're getting some kind of antitrust exemption. You're not getting it. You're not getting it from Congress. You're not getting it from anybody. That's not even on the docket. again, maybe Troy's saying, once again, we're going to have the government clean up our mess because we don't have the ability to, or we don't want to, or we just want to try to hold on to what we can from the old days when we were breaking antitrust laws. Whichever way Troy's going, we'll see. Maybe this guy's right. I just don't believe it until I actually see it. But pretty interesting stuff from Troy Dannon, athletic director at Nebraska. My favorite part is when he's standing there talking to collectives, telling the collectives they'll be illegal in 2 years. But before you're illegal, can you pony up a bunch of dough so we can pay players? It's like having your spouse come to you, hey, I'm going to leave you in 2 years, but before I leave you, can you buy me a bunch of stuff? Interesting. All right, we will continue on with football in the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. Let's get back to the quarterback tiers on ESPN.com, David Hale's post. We're looking at the SEC quarterbacks. A couple of interesting tiers we want to get into. That's coming up next. Halftime show, Terry Ford, Ed Bird, up until 3 here on the game. What you're talking about, what we're talking about, obviously, is a baseball search. Nothing new there. We talked about it. Chris Clark put a post up about an hour ago, a little bit over an hour ago, Gamecock Central, saying Dan McClellan seems like, according to sources, is out of the running to be the next Gamecock baseball coach. But that's the only person Chris put in the post saying that's the only guy that seems like is out. Everybody else is still in play, whether it's Cliff Godwin, Monty Lee, Chris Pollard, Tom Walter. It feels like everybody else is still in the mix in some way, shape, or form, but Dan McClellan or McConnell. Jeez, I keep saying Dan McDonald. Dan McDonald at Louisville seems like, according to sources, is out of the running. And we'll get back to the baseball conversation top of the hour with what's trending at 2 here on the game. Let's spin back, though. Football in the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. I've been going through these quarterback tiers in college football that David Hale put up on ESPN.com, and now we're picking through to get you the SEC quarterback rooms and where they rank. The next set, and just in case you missed it the last few days, in Tier 1, SEC quarterback rooms, Alabama led by Jalen Milroe, Georgia led by Carson Beck, and Texas led by Quinn Ewers are in Tier 1. Tier 2 does not have any SEC quarterbacks there. Tier 3 has Missouri's Brady Cook leading the Missouri quarterback room. Ole Miss's Jackson Dart leading that quarterback room. Tier 4 has 2 SEC quarterbacks. New SEC member Oklahoma, their quarterback room with Jackson Arnold and Casey Thompson. Has Casey Thompson played for every program in America? And, of course, Tennessee with Nico and Gaston Moore. This one's called The Young and the Restless. Some interesting stuff from this. Looking at Lincoln Riley when he was at Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley obviously is looked at as the ultimate quarterback whisperer in college football, right? From Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams. You know, you play for Lincoln Riley at quarterback, it feels like you end up at the Heisman Trophy ceremony, right? This is interesting, though. Lincoln Riley, his last 2 years at Oklahoma, the quarterback numbers, the QBR, almost 81. With 62 TD passes, 17 picks. Last 2 years at Oklahoma without Lincoln Riley, QBR 79.7, just a little bit under what the last 2 years of Lincoln Riley were at Oklahoma. 61 touchdown passes, 17 picks. Almost identical numbers. Almost identical numbers at Oklahoma. And Dylan Gabriel's a dude. I mean, he's gone now. He's at Oregon. Dylan Gabriel did some nice work at Oklahoma. Can Jackson Arnold pick it up and go? I mean, Jackson Arnold kind of gave you a mixed bag in the bowl game. So we'll see where Jackson Arnold rolls off to with the keys to the Oklahoma offense with a new coordinator, or coordinators, I should say. Also, we look at Tennessee and Nico. I look, folks in Knoxville, and not just Knoxville, but a lot of people who in the college football world are very excited to see what Nico can do in Josh Heupel's offense. Because let's face it, I mean, we watched Joe Milton last year, and this was not, we talked about it going into the season. Joe Milton, yeah, if you stand around in flip-flops and, you know, bike shorts, Joe Milton looks like an impressive quarterback. Chucking the rock 80, 90, 100 yards, you know, like that old Michael Vick commercial. Joe Milton throwing it out of the stadium, hitting some dude in the head who's walking his dog. You know, Joe Milton, arm talent, athleticism. Wow. When Joe Milton is just out there flinging the football with, you know, just maybe pitching and catching with his buddies, looks impressive. Then put Joe Milton on a football field against an opposition who is rushing him, who is disguising defenses, who is hurrying him up. Joe Milton had no idea where the ball was going when he was throwing it. Zero. Sloppy footwork. And it was apparent to anybody watching Joe Milton at Tennessee last year, you knew there was some serious limitations with the Josh Heupel passing game because there's limitations with Joe Milton. So a lot of people are really excited to see Nico, who everyone thinks will be an upgrade from Joe Milton, take over as the quarterback at Tennessee in Josh Heupel's fancy, high-powered offense. Interesting stat on Josh Heupel. As an offensive coordinator or head coach, since 2011, Josh Heupel's offenses have averaged 3,551 passing yards, 29 touchdown passes a year. In his 6 seasons as head coach at Central Florida and Tennessee, his quarterbacks have thrown a total of only 30 picks. And they throw a comparison up here. For comparison, Georgia Southern last year alone threw 20. Overall, as a head coach, Josh Heupel's quarterbacks have a TD to interception ratio of 6.3 to 1. That's 3 times better than the average FBS college football program. Only Alabama has posted a better rate over that span, which makes sense. But even Joe Milton last year, the one positive for Joe Milton is he didn't throw picks last year. That was the one positive. So in the Josh Heupel offense, is it just the way Josh Heupel coaches quarterbacks? Is this offense so quarterback friendly and the way the system of passing game runs that it kind of eliminates that risk of interception? What really matters is the Josh Heupel offense's very low interception rates. I thought that was interesting in that tier. Now, what's Nico going to do at Tennessee? Who knows? Guy's got a ton of talent. Really does. High-profile 5-star quarterback recruit. We've heard about the NIL deals and all that where he's making $1 billion a year or whatever. But Nico can sling it. Got a little taste of that last year. We'll see what Nico does as the starting quarterback at Tennessee. And Oklahoma, Jackson Arnold, again, a mixed bag at the end of the year. Another highly recruited guy with a lot of talent. How does he fare in a new offense with new coordinators? Oklahoma also replacing a bunch of pieces on the O-line. There's some question marks on the offensive side of the ball in Norman, no doubt. The other tier we want to hit real quick, Tier 5B, the transfer market. Where's it at here? This is interesting. I want to find this. Is this the one I want? The transfer, oh, no. Well, now I want to get to this one. The transfer market. If you look at numbers of homegrown quarterbacks, guys that came in the portal in 1 year, and guys who came in the portal but in their second year with the program. The best numbers are the guys who transfer in, the veterans who are in your program for the second year. Their numbers are the best. Second best numbers are the guys that come in from the transfer portal, the veterans. The worst numbers, not by a lot, but the worst numbers are the homegrown. No, the worst numbers are the transfer guys from 1 year. Let me correct it. I'm looking at it now. The second best numbers are the homegrown guys. So best numbers, you transferred in, it's your second year as a starter. Second best numbers are the homegrown guys. The worst numbers are the guys who just transfer in. Kind of makes sense, right? This is from last year. You come in, you're a veteran, you've already got starts under your belt in some way, shape, or form. Now you're 2 years into the system, you play better, you're more comfortable. Homegrown guy's been in the system his whole time, he's comfortable. Guy that comes in for the first year, he's not comfortable. New system, new teammates, new everything. I thought those numbers were very interesting. The last tier, I love this one because this one is like, wow. This one's called Tier 7, the curse of 2022. The 2022 recruiting class could go down as one of the all-time biggest disappointments for quarterbacks. Per ESPN rankings, there were 31 quarterbacks rated a 4 or 5 star that was recruited in 2022. They've so far combined for just 68 starts, a total QBR of 53.8. Yuck. They completed under 60% of their passes. One of those is Connor Wegman at Texas A&M, who, by the way, was having a really good year last season before he got injured. Other guys they're talking about here, Kate Klubnik at Clemson, Drew Aller at Penn State, and Malik Murphy at Duke. One SEC quarterback in there again, Connor Wegman. But these guys, highly touted, highly recruited, and it just hasn't worked in that class of 2022. And a bunch of them have transferred already, by the way. 10 of them. So very interesting, the class of 2022. So that's some of the tier quarterback stuff. We might dig into that some next week as well. All right, football here in the 1 o'clock hour. We'll come back. 803-404-6100. Firehouse Sub text of the hour is next here on the halftime show. Terry Ford, Ed Bird rolling till 3 on the game. Time for our Firehouse Sub text of the hour at 803-404-6100. Always appreciate you hitting us up on the text line. This is from our buddy Steve in Blythewood, one of our frequent texters. Steve says, at this point, if they do hire Monty Lee, it means a lot of other people turn them down. I mean, is that a perception you can take? Sure. You absolutely can take that. Because I've heard multiple people who follow this and follow college baseball and are following this search have said if Monty Lee was the guy, Monty Lee would have the job at this point. That way, everything could move forward. You could start working the portal. You could start, trying to keep your guys out of the portal. And right now, 5 players have gone in the portal. There's been a lot of smoke and heat about Ethan Petrie. Is Petrie going to hit the portal? Is he going to stay at South Carolina? So far, Petrie hasn't hit the portal. My guess is he probably wants to see who the head coach is going to be. And then maybe, talk to the head coach. Because maybe Petrie, his first option or first choice, he'd love to stay. But again, he was brought in by Mark Kingston and that staff. So I feel like that's the weight there. To me, if Petrie wanted to go, he'd have been gone as soon as the portal opened, right? My guess is that he wants to get the lay of the land. See what's up. See who the new coach is. Maybe have a conversation with that said new coach. And then go from there. That's the feeling to me about it. But the hope is obviously you keep Ethan Petrie. All right, speaking of the coaching search, we are doing our final 107.5 The Game Twitter X poll on the candidates. We had 3 first-round brackets. We had 4 winners because we had a tie. So the 4 winners are now in the final ballot, the final Twitter poll. They are Cliff Godwin, East Carolina, Chris Lemonis, Mississippi State, Josh Elander, the assistant head coach at Tennessee, and Chris Pollard at Duke. Right now, we've been doing this 2 hours. We got 241 votes, over 1,800 views. Again, we appreciate you very much. Thank you. Long way to go till this is over, but right now, Cliff Godwin, East Carolina, leading the way at 44%. Josh Elander, Tennessee assistant head coach at 30% second. Chris Pollard at Duke, 17% third. Chris Lemonis, Mississippi State, fourth. We read some of these. We have a few comments. When we read them last hour, we had a new comment to it. Someone put in for Landon Powell as a write-in. Someone else put in for Monty Lee as a write-in. Tom Walter was a write-in. And then 2 folks wanted to vote for this candidate, none of the above. That's where we're at with our Twitter X poll on who should be the next baseball coach at the University of South Carolina. Again, thank you very much for your participation. We got 22 hours left to go on this thing, man. So feel free to get your votes in. And if you want to put your comment in on the topic of the search, have at it there as well. As we see the final Twitter poll results, feels like that Cliff Godwin's going to win this thing. That's just the vibe I'm getting. So we'll see. But long way to go. And we'll get more into the coaching search again, top of the hour, 2 o'clock. I just saw a headline that's very disturbing. And I just saw the headlines. I had to click on it, and it is football related. And again, it's just a headline about a lawsuit, but here it is. Former Miami Dolphins star corner Xavier Howard has had a lawsuit filed against him. The allegations are that Howard sent a male teenager a sexually explicit photograph of the teen's mom. Because she refused to end a pregnancy. Wow. That's just, wow. If that's true, the things I'd want to say about that we can't say on the radio because they get us fined. We lose our license. Because that is so many different levels of wrong. Just so many different levels of wrong. And we don't have time to go into the many different levels of wrong that is. According to this, again, according to allegations, former Miami Dolphin corner Xavier Howard sent a male teenager a sexually explicit photograph of his mother because the teen's mom would not end a pregnancy. Wow. We don't know if it's true, but if that's true, look, I've known people who have done some dirty stuff to each other in relationships. That might be an all-timer, if it's true. Wow. All right, that's football in the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. Let's get you caught up on the baseball coach search. That's coming up next, and what's trending at 2 here on the game, sponsored by Gamecock Traditions and Traditions Fine Jewelry. It is a halftime show right here on the game. Oh, it's halftime show. Terry Ford, Ed Bird, as we go till 3 here on the game. What's trending at 2? We're going to get to that in just a second. First of all, there's so many ways to listen to this radio station. If you're just hanging here in Columbia like the old days, pop on 107.5 The Game. Or you can check us out in our 2 affiliates. In Myrtle Beach, 100.3 The Game. In Florence, 100.5 The Game. You can also download our app. iTunes, Google Play. As long as you got cell service, you can listen to the game. Also, you're saying there's more, Tara. Sure, you can actually watch us. Because how much fun it is to look at the shine off my head. How you doing? Hey, what's up? Huh? Look at that thing. You can go to our YouTube channel at The Game TV Radio. It's sponsored by our buds at Shepherd's Glass and also powered by our good friends at Integrated Media. We stalk you everywhere, man. You can't get away from us. All right, what's trending at 2? Sponsored by Gamecock Traditions and Traditions Fine Jewelry. If you didn't hear, we talked about this top of the 1 o'clock hour, but we want to reset it because obviously it's important. Gamecock baseball coach search. Chris Clark posts up a little bit, right around 12, a little bit after 12, his latest thoughts and what he's heard. And in case you missed some of that, the one thing that has come out, according to multiple industry sources, that Louisville's Dan McDonnell is no longer in the mix for the gig. Chris has no more details than that, but the head coach of South Carolina won't be Dan McDonnell. I said this in the 1 o'clock hour. It's probably money. McDonnell's making a little bit over 1.3 at Louisville. I mean, obviously he's going to want to raise to come to South Carolina. There's a buyout involved. How much does McDonnell want for his coaching staff? There's things involved financially. That's my first thought. Could I be wrong? Oh, God, yeah. Probably been wrong 60 times on the show. But my first thought is it financially related with McDonnell? Maybe he wants, Kevin O'Sullivan type money. Who knows? That's over $1.7 million. But Dan McDonnell not in the running anymore for the head coaching spot at South Carolina. Chris also said he had a bunch of the folks that subscribe to Gamecock Central ask him about Wake Forest's Tom Walter. Walter wasn't mentioned in Chris's update a couple days ago. At that time, Chris said just didn't simply have as much information. But according to Chris, Tom Walter at Wake Forest is still in the mix. Now, you have to pay Walter 7 figures. He's making a little bit over $1 million at Wake, like $1.1 million, $1.2 million. Between $1 million and $1.2 million. Let's just call it that. You obviously have to give Walter a bump. I'm guessing 1.5 to show up at South Carolina. Plus, there's going to be a buyout involved there. Walter redid his deal, right before last season, I think. So there'll be a buyout involved there as well. And again, you have to, a lot of these coaches now say, okay, how much money are you going to put out for the staff? Because that's a gigantic piece of this. But Tom Walter's still in the mix. And Chris Clark said this, and I've heard this from people who know a lot more than me, that there are some folks in the baseball community that have said that Walter has been very intrigued about getting into the SEC. You remember Walter interviewed for the South Carolina job when Mark Kingston was also, when he got the gig. So Walter, not out of the mix yet, but you're going to have to, you're going to go 7 figures on Tom Walter. Other names that Chris previously has thrown out, Duke's Chris Pollard, East Carolina's Cliff Godwin, Monty Lee, who's the interim coach here at South Carolina, all still in the running as well. There's been a lot of talk about Cliff Godwin. We had Nate Summers on the air, the sports editor from the Reflector, the major newspaper in Greenville, North Carolina. And, Nate said, usually in this situation, you would say no. Cliff Godwin has spurned offers in the past. He'll spurn this offer, too, because he wants to stay at his alma mater, East Carolina. His goal is to get East Carolina to Omaha, and the only gig he would even think about taking would be Ole Miss, where he was an assistant coach. But Nate said he feels like what has changed is the landscape of college athletics. East Carolina, multiple important players have gone to the transfer portal at ECU. And ECU can't keep them because they can't match the NIL money that power programs could offer. So if Cliff Godwin's looking around saying, I can't compete on a high level, or even because I just can't compete financially in the NIL space. Would Godwin want to go where he can compete in the NIL space or have a better chance to compete in the NIL space in a power league at a place like South Carolina again, a baseball-loving community who does have more resources than East Carolina? Could that be the thing that changes Cliff Godwin's mind? And so far, we haven't heard any quotes from Cliff Godwin or sources around Cliff Godwin saying he's not interested in the South Carolina gig. There's been no whispering from agents at all, or none of these guys. We haven't heard Tom Walters. People deny that Walter would be open to it. Chris Pollard. Obviously, Monty Lee's interested. But, so that's kind of where this is at with a Cliff Godwin, is this might be the spot. The timing might be right. And I said before, look, I love Walter. Pollard's the work that Pollard's done at Duke is unreal. He hasn't been to Omaha. Obviously, Walter has been to Omaha. Cliff Godwin checks a lot of the right boxes on all sides, all agendas. Godwin is well respected in the baseball world, the college baseball world. They think he's a high level coach. If you hired Cliff Godwin, or for that matter, Pollard, Walter, these out of house candidates, all are looked at as high level coaches. Obviously, Godwin has knocked on the door at the Super Regional, I believe, 4 times. Pollard, I believe, has been there 3 at Duke. And obviously, Walter made it to Omaha. There's a difference. You're going to have to pay 7 figures for Pollard, 7 figures for Walter. Cliff Godwin's only making $600,000 at East Carolina. Listen to me say $600,000 like it's nothing. Okay. But if you get Godwin, you're getting him for less than it would take you to get Pollard or Walter. And that checks a box, too, let's just be real, for the university. You're getting a coach that people look at is on a high level, and you're getting him for less money than you would for Pollard or Walter. And we're talking about the out-of-house people right now. So I think Godwin does check a bunch of boxes. And there have been a lot of people I've listened to in the last couple of days who know a lot more about the college baseball world and the coaching searches in the college baseball world, or the people watching this search who have been around a while in this area, that think if Monty Lee was the top candidate, that he would have gotten the job by now. So you could move on to the business of mining the transfer portal to make your team better and saving your guys from going in the portal. But Monty Lee is still in the mix with these other out-of-house folks. So that's the latest. And also, Chris Clark says he hasn't been able to establish a firm pecking order out of the remaining candidates. And he says it's entirely possible that's because the guy hasn't been identified as yet. Could it be Elander, the assistant head coach at Tennessee? That name has been out there multiple times. A guy that has been, Tony Vitelli's right-hand man at Tennessee. Has been very involved in all aspects of the success of that program. He's only 33 years old. Someone eventually is going to hire him. But as we've talked about here at South Carolina, in this situation right now, where this program is at and where this program wants to get back to, no one's saying that Josh would be a bad choice, but I just feel like you need a guy in a perfect world who's been to Omaha, or if he's not been to Omaha, he's drove around the neighborhood multiple times. And with the thought that guy that's driving around the neighborhood multiple times, coming to South Carolina with more resources and a rabid baseball fan base, that could get you from driving around multiple times to actually getting you in the city of Omaha. Those are the people I think I would look at first before an unproven assistant who has not been a coach. Not to say that Elander won't be fantastic whenever he lands. And who's to say if Ray Tanner hires him, he wouldn't be fantastic here. I'm just giving you my thoughts, but that's why Ray gets paid to make this choice. Just saying. That's the latest from Chris Clark on Gamecock Central regarding the whole coaching search. So just get you caught up there on what's going on from our buddy Chris Clark, who, by the way, is doing this while he's on vacation. That's dedication. Yeah, honey, I'll be out the beach in a minute. I got to write this post. It's kind of like a baseball search, coaching search, kind of important. All right, coming up here in just a few minutes. Earlier, during the, I believe, the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, by the way, our buddy Jack Veltri sat in for Wes. Chris on vacation. Wes couldn't be here today. Jack Veltri sitting in, doing a really nice job with Tyler. They talked to Teddy Cahill, Baseball America, obviously covering the whole college baseball scene. Teddy talked about the South Carolina opening, also the supers that are going on right now. Florida State and UConn are going at it. We're going to re-rack that interview with Teddy Cahill because the goal here for me on our show, our little get-together here every day, I want you to get as much information from as many different voices about the South Carolina baseball head coaching search as possible. Either there's people locally here who are digging in, who have covered the team for a long time, or national folks who, from a national perspective, have been covering the whole country and know from, the national eyeball about this coaching search in South Carolina. So Teddy Cahill, Baseball America, we're going to rack that up next. Hey, the craft beer card is here. 30 craft beer locations involved this time. You get to spend $30 a brewery. 30 times 12 will be $360. That's what you would pay to do this without a craft beer card. You pay $79, get a craft beer card. You save yourself a lot of money. Very easy. Go to 1075thegame.com, click on Sweet Deals, grab yourself a craft beer card. Up next, Tyler and Jack's interview with Teddy Cahill of Baseball America. We're going to re-rack that next. It's a halftime show. Terry Ford, Ed Bird's hanging. We go to 3 on the game. Halftime show, Terry Ford hanging in, Ed Bird steering the ship as we go till 3 o'clock, almost at 2. I guess 2 Central, right, Ed? We go till 2 Central, 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific. All right, Teddy Cahill from Baseball America was on in the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour with Tyler and Jack Veltri. Jack, of course, filling in for Wes. Chris on vacation. And Tyler and Jack, nice work with Teddy Cahill, Baseball America, talking about a variety of stuff. The super regionals, which is the national perspective right now in college baseball, but locally as well. Teddy discussed the South Carolina gig. And we'll open this up where Tyler and Jack asked Teddy, how is the South Carolina job viewed nationally? Is it looked at as one of the best gigs in the country? Where is that compared to what it used to be about a decade ago? Here's Teddy Cahill's answer to that question.
I mean, it's a really difficult question, and I think that is a problem for South Carolina, the fact that is difficult, because it should be one of the better jobs, you would think. But, for now, 12 years, it's been, let's just call it what it is. It's a middle-of-the-pack SEC program over the last 12 years. And, there are a lot of reasons why you think you can elevate back. I mean, what Ray Tanner did at the end, that's probably not going to happen again, realistically. But there are reasons why you think you can elevate back more towards what happened in the first decade plus of the century than what's happened in the last 12 years. You have the stadium, you have the facilities, you have this wonderful fan base that cares so deeply about baseball. But a lot of schools in the SEC have all of that too. So, they've got to find a way to get back to that. Some of that is a matter of investment in different ways. But, when you look at it, it's a solid job. If we're comparing it to jobs nationally, it rates amazingly. But within the SEC, I think it is pretty tricky, especially in a newly expanded SEC as you add Texas and Oklahoma.
Teddy, Jack Veltri from GamecockCentral.com. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. When you speak of investment, with this job, there's a few options. I feel like South Carolina could go down here. They could either go down the cheaper, safer route of hiring a Monty Lee or Landon Powell, people that will say yes, or they can go down the route of hiring a coach with a lot of experience. They've had opportunities to get to Omaha and have been there and won it in some cases. When you look at this whole thing, it would cost a lot more money to bring in one of those coaches that have been, that have that experience. How important is it for South Carolina to financially invest in not just the coach, but also the, maybe stadium refurbishment, putting more money into the program in that way?
I mean, I think it's crucial. You look around and head coaching salary is probably a poor measure of how invested a program is. There are probably better measures out there, but it's a quick and easy one. There are 9 programs that spend $1 million on a head coach in the SEC, and South Carolina is not one of them. And so if we're going to sit here and we're going to talk about, how does South Carolina get back? That's a big part of it. And if you're now in the bottom half of the league in salary, what else are you in the bottom half of that, takes me a little bit longer to look up, Where are you in terms of, overall coaching salary pool? Where are you in terms of, what's available to NIL, and on down the list. So, I think that investment is crucial. That's just the reality of SEC baseball in the 2020s, that, you have to be ready to pony up if you want to compete with the likes of, a Texas, an LSU, the Mississippi schools care as much as anyone, what Arkansas is doing, what Florida's doing, Tennessee now. And even Kentucky, you look at them, new stadium, hosting a super regional for the first time. These are all schools that have gotten serious or have been serious for a long time and have stayed really serious. And it's just a really hard league in terms of keeping up with the financial might that everyone else is throwing in there.
And talking to Teddy Cahill from Baseball America. We'll switch gears over to the Super Regionals now, and the SEC did set a record for most teams from one conference making the tournament at 11. That number got cut in half with a bunch of teams getting sent packing, including the Gamecocks this past weekend in regionals. How many SEC teams are going to make it out of Supers and make their way to Omaha after this weekend?
I think I have 3 going, but you could convince me of any number from 2 to 5.
Teddy, going off that a little bit with the SEC, what is one matchup in particular you're going to be glued onto this weekend with paying attention to?
Within the SEC, I'm really interested in Kentucky and Oregon State. I think that, that's a spot where I don't like the SEC team as much. But, you have Kentucky. They've been so good for so much of the season. I know South Carolina fans might be a little confused about that when you compare them to some of the other teams that are still playing from the SEC. But they've been really consistent, but now you have a program that's never been to Omaha before, that's never hosted a super regional before. You've got a lot of players that, are at a stage that they haven't been at before. You've got Oregon State, which has been really good. They were only the number 15 overall seed, and feel like that was a little underseeded, but not terribly so. They are a different team than they've been a lot of the year, though. They got a lot healthier down the stretch, and they're playing really good baseball. They've got one of the best players in the country in Travis Bazana, and I'm really intrigued to see how they handle this going into Lexington. I think it's a good matchup for Oregon State, but it is a series that Kentucky can absolutely win. That one has a lot of my attention this weekend for sure.
And off of that, how much does that experience of Oregon State being a program that's been there and done that before with these super regionals help them, despite going on the road to a place like Kentucky that's a little bit newer to this kind of thing?
I think it matters, but I think the experience matters a little bit less here because it's not like Oregon State has a ton of experience on their current roster. They played in a home super regional a couple of years ago and came up short when Auburn beat them. But Mitch Canham was not a part of the national championship teams. He was in pro ball as a coach. He was in pro ball in 2018. He played on the national championship teams. In 2005 and 6, but it's a little different now for him. What I do think is significant, though, is Kentucky is potentially going to feel pressure in a way that they haven't this season, because once you get to this stage, you can see sometimes with the hosts, especially the hosts that don't have the experience or the program institutional, just expectation that you go through to Omaha, that these games are really intense. You can see just how close you are. And sometimes that gets magnified when you're at home. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. I just don't Oregon State certainly expects, they will have heard all of the stories and everything, but they don't actually have personal experience of breaking through themselves.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about another SEC team with Tennessee, and I think it's a really intriguing squad they have this year. They've been the best team in the country pretty much all season long, but the one thing about them is that they've always come up short when we're looking at winning a College World Series. Do you feel like this is the year for them? I think they have the best draw of any of these super regional matchups, getting paired with Evansville, who's obviously coming off a nice run in East Carolina. What do you think about Tennessee, and what do you feel like the outcome for them looks like this year?
I mean, they certainly have what it takes to get it done. They're the favorites and the deserved favorites. I mean, the only reason that I would, have hesitancy about saying, this is the year Tennessee will do it is that, the best team often doesn't win in Omaha. That's not really what it's about. LSU, I thought, was the best team last year, and they did win, obviously, but other people may have viewed things a little bit differently, and obviously they weren't the number 1 overall seed. It's just really hard to play at the level that Tennessee's trying to play at for, the better part of 4 months. They've not lost a series since opening weekend of SEC play. There are eventually ebbs and flows of everything. And, it's hard to pick a spot with Tennessee and say, this is why they're not going to do it. This isn't their most talented team, which I don't think, really means much of anything at this point. There's no team as talented as the 2022 Vols in the field anyway. But it is a team that, they have the 2022 team lost, and that was as good as a team as you'll probably ever see at Tennessee. So, they can definitely be beat. I don't think Evansville is going to be the team to do it. But once we get to Omaha, things can go haywire. And, any of the teams remaining have the ability probably to go out and do something. So Tennessee certainly should be considered the national championship favorites. I don't know if I would pick them right now, but they've earned that status.
Last one for you here. The Athens Super Regional is one of particular intrigue. That is what Carolina would have been matched up with had they been able to get out of the NC State Regional. But NC State going the road to Foley Field this weekend. Does this have the potential to maybe give us the most fireworks as far as offensive baseball between these two teams matching up this weekend?
I mean, there's certainly going to be a lot of home runs hit there. It's two very offensive clubs, an offensive ballpark. I mean, you've got Charlie Condon there. That's a great place to start for offensive fireworks. But a lot of these supers could end up being a little more offensive. Last weekend was less offensive than I think people expected. So that probably holds. I think we've just started seeing a little bit better pitching. But this one, in that ballpark with those rosters, they're older, they know what they're doing, and that ballpark can certainly give up some home runs. So if you want to watch some home runs, like Athens is a pretty good bet.
Teddy Cahill from Baseball America giving thoughts on the South Carolina head coach opening, also his thoughts on the Supers. And right now, Florida State's pummeling UConn in Game 1, 11-1 in Tallahassee. Again, not a surprise if Florida State wins, but Game 1's been a smackdown so far between Florida State and UConn. Games in the 6th inning. All right, we will come back. Greatest day in the history of the world. Sponsored by 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Also, we'll talk to you on the Love Chevy phone line, 803-404-6100 as well. And a couple other notes from the world of sports. It was an NBA Finals Game 1 that went down last night. Wasn't really very exciting, except for maybe a minute or two, but we'll get into that as well. All right, halftime show, Terry Ford, Ed Bird, till 3 on the Game. All right, halftime show, Terry Ford and Ed Bird up until 3. Then our buddies Jay and Elijah will take over with the post-game show here on the game in Columbia, Florence, and Myrtle Beach. Again, always thanks for it. We appreciate you hanging out with us. Maybe you're on the Game TV, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass, Power of Integrated Media. We appreciate you. There we go. I got to go the opposite way of the thing. I'm such a natural for TV. You can hit that, our YouTube channel at The Game TV Radio. And you can always just download the 107.5 The Game app, iTunes, Google Play. Listen to us pretty much anywhere in the solar system that has cell phone. All right, greatest day in the history of the world. We'll fire through some of these real quick, sponsored by 1-800-GOT-JUNK. This day in 2018, the Washington Capitals raised the Stanley Cup for the first time in franchise history, beat the Vegas Golden Knights in 5. The best part of that, now, again, I was in Baltimore at the time when the Caps won, was watching Alexander Ovechkin go everywhere with the Stanley Cup drunk out of his mind. He's just drinking booze out of the cup. He's jumping in fountains, doing fountain angels. I've always been whatever about Alexander Ovechkin. He became one of my favorite players in sports, watching him celebrate with that cup, because to me, it's how all of us regular dudes would celebrate. We grab that cup, fill it full of our favorite adult beverage, and just go crazy. And by the way, I remember the first time I heard these stories. This was way back when I first started doing sports radio in 2000. I was doing it for Sporting News, and they had a guy who covered hockey, and he was like the god of hockey media, a guy named Larry Wiggy. And we had Larry on once, and he told stories about guys who, because everybody gets their day with the Stanley Cup. If you win, every player gets a day with the cup. It's a tradition in the NHL. And he was telling some of those stories, which were phenomenal. Some of them I probably can't repeat now, but they were phenomenal about what these guys would do a day with the cup. Ovechkin was just drunk carrying the thing around everywhere. That was 2018 Caps. They win the Stanley Cup, beating the Vegas Golden Knights. This day in 2015, LeBron James popped a triple-double. Cavaliers overcame a fourth quarter collapse to beat Golden State 95-93 in Game 2 of the NBA Finals. Remember, Golden State beat Cleveland, 3 out of 4 times in the finals. 2014, Miguel Cotto becomes the first Puerto Rican fighter to win a world championship in 4 weight divisions. Miguel Cotto was a phenomenal boxer. Another guy no one ever talks about anymore. Also this day in 2014, Maria Sharapova wins her 5th Grand Slam singles title. Again, at the French and Roland Garros. A lot of sports fans like Maria Sharapova. And we'll just leave it at that. But then remember, she had the PED ban, and then came back, was never the same, and just kind of floated away. Roger Federer completed the career Grand Slam, winning the French Open on this day. 2006, New Jersey becomes the first state to institute statewide steroid testing for high school athletes. It's a thing. Absolutely. It's everywhere in athletics. Chess players are taking steroids. I mean, I will get one other one in here. In 1989, Wayne Gretzky won his 9th NHL MVP award in 10 years. Let me repeat that. 9th MVP award in 10 years for Wayne Gretzky in 1989. So that's the greatest day in the history of the world, which is June 7th. Sponsored by 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Couple quick things that happened in the world of sports we haven't gotten to yet yesterday. First of all, the NBA Finals started last night. Cut 8, Ed Bird, hit it.
Pritchard, who just checked in. Porzingis way outside, knocks down another. What a start in his Finals debut. Irving blocked by Porzingis. He's doing it all.
Kristaps Porzingis had himself a first half last night for the Boston Celtics. Porzingis hasn't played in the postseason because of a calf injury. His first game back last night, Porzingis went crazy. He scored 18 points in the first half, had blocked shots. I mean, it felt like Porzingis was everywhere doing everything on both ends of the court. Celtics, they were boat racing Dallas. 63, 42 at the half. The thing looked over. The Celtics came out and played the third quarter like they thought it was over. They decided, screw this run in the offense. Let's just chuck threes for a while. And we don't really have to play defense. This thing's over. It's like the Celtics came out of the locker room drunk. And the Mavs cut a 29-point lead to 8. Luka Doncic was phenomenal in the third quarter, but then the Celtics got themselves back together, pulled the lead back out to double digits, eventually got it over 20 again, won by 18. 6 Celtics in double figures. Boston smacked Dallas without Jason Tatum doing a whole lot. Tatum only scored 16, but did have 11 rebounds in the game. Jaylen Brown was really good as well on both ends of the court. And one of the things why I picked Boston, even though I said this before, the Celtics truly haven't been tested in this postseason. And my thought was I picked Boston to win the series. And I don't think it goes 7. But Dallas could steal this thing if the Mavericks pop the Celtics in the face in Boston Garden in one of the first 2 games. Boston has not been very good at home in the postseason. So if you can get it game 1 or 2, and then you take it back to Dallas tied, maybe you get some momentum to start making things a little heated on the Celtics, who on paper are a better team. But here's why I take Boston. It isn't about Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving or Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum. It's not about the A-listers. It's about the starters and the rest of the guys. Boston is just better 3 through 5, really 3 through 6 with Al Horford. And you have Holiday at guard and White at guard and also Porzingis. Boston's 3, 4, 5, and 6 players are much better than Dallas's 3, 4, 5, 6 players. That's where Boston wins the series. You saw it last night, 6 Celtics in double figures, only 3 Mavs, only 1 Mav not named Doncic or Irving. And Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, one assist combined, 7 turnovers. I believe that was the number. 3 assists combined, 7 turnovers. It's game 1. If you're Dallas, find a way to steal game 2 on Sunday. You steal home court and you go back home. You just need one of them. I do think the Celtics win the series. Again, they're just the better overall team. And both squads have stars. But the next level guys, the Celtics are just better. One other story from we didn't get from the NFL. NFL is using new cool football spotting technology for games. Here is ESPN's Adam Schefter to kind of explain this to us.
Newsflash, it's 2024. And despite all its technological innovations and progressive thinking, the NFL still is operating with a chain gang that's straight out of Canton, Ohio in 1920 to measure first downs. But now the league is looking at a new system that would spot the ball without the chain gang, that would rely on technology to get the job done. It would be very 2024 and in line with the league that is so forward-thinking, so progressive in every way, except for the way that it spots the football and measures first downs. The time has come. It's 2024, and we may see it in the way the football is spotted and measured this upcoming season.
Oh, come on, NFL. Why do you want to do that? Use technology to spot the football. Why would you? I love what John Madden used to say, the left-right system. The official runs in, left foot, right foot. Who doesn't love watching these guys try to spot the ball? And then bringing out the chain gang with the link and sitting it down to see if it's a first down or not. How much fun is that? You want to take that away? Come on with your stupid technology and being right. That would stink. We don't want to be right. We like how screwed up it is now. Of course, you'd want to use technology to make it right. Basically, this technology, Bolt 6 is what it's called, is also used by NASCAR, the PGA Tour, Pro Tennis, Volleyball, America's Cup. They install 6 cameras in each stadium, which would allow technology to precisely determine where the ball is spotted. How boring is that, Ed Bird? Precision, accuracy. All right, Firehouse Sub Text the Hour coming up. Also, we might yip a few minutes with Jay Phillips as well. Halftime show, Terry Ford, Ed Bird, till 3 on the game. Time for our Firehouse Sub Text the Hour at 803-404-6100. Does lower level coaching equate to SEC assistant? I guess when you're looking at a coaching search, which is a very interesting question. We went over the breakdown of all the coaches in the SEC. I didn't include Oklahoma and Texas in this because they're not officially in yet. They will be. But when you look at the head coaches in the SEC, 9 of them have some type of head coaching experience before they took their present gigs. One is JUCO, and that's Butch Thompson. He was a JUCO head coach, got to the JUCO World Series, and hit the assistant trail at Georgia, Auburn, and Mississippi State. Tim Corbin was the head coach at Presbyterian when Presbyterian was going from NAIA to NCAA. Then jumped on the assistant train. Final stop was Clemson before Corbin took the Vandy gig. You got 9. You got 4 coaches who were truly just assistants before they popped into the SEC. That was Kevin O'Sullivan, who was an assistant in multiple places, including Virginia, Clemson. Clemson was the last stop before Florida. You had Tony Vitello, who was an assistant at his alma mater, Missouri, where he played. Also, Vitello was an assistant at Arkansas before he took off to Tennessee. And in between there was TCU with Schlossnagle. And then you had our guy Nick at at Kentucky, who was an assistant at Kentucky, Western Carolina, and Mississippi State. And finally, Wes Johnson, the head coach of Georgia, who has been an assistant in many stops, like Dallas Baptist, another one in Mississippi State. Arkansas was the pitching coach with the Minnesota Twins and came back to college because LSU offered a boatload of dough. And then Johnson got the head coaching job at Georgia. So I would say this. If you look at the guys who left head coaching jobs to come to the SEC, like, for example, Jay Johnson left Arizona where he took the Wildcats to College World Series before he got to LSU. Now, Mike Bianco was at McNeese State before he jumped to Ole Miss. Does McNeese State equate Tony Vitello being an assistant at Missouri, TCU, and Arkansas? I mean, you're working under some high-level dudes. Does that look, just because you're a great lieutenant doesn't mean you're going to be a great captain, right, or general. We've seen assistants who have not done as well as a lot of people. It's like Chad Holbrook. A lot of folks thought Chad would just pick up the mantle from Ray Tanner, maybe not be as good as Ray, but still keep South Carolina as one of the best programs in America. It didn't go the way everyone hoped. It happens sometimes. It just does. Not every top assistant or top lieutenant at a successful program who is like sitting with a high-level coach ends up becoming a high-level coach too. It just doesn't equate that way. But the 4 guys we just talked about without head coaching experience who were at some pretty good places as assistants have done well, at least this year they're doing well, with their baseball programs. I'll say this. Let's look at this real quick. Cliff Godwin is a guy we talked about from East Carolina who, he really doesn't want to leave East Carolina. It's his alma mater. He loves it there. His goal is to take the Pirates off one day to the College World Series. But in the NIL world, East Carolina is losing important, vital players in the transfer portal. Would Godwin want to leave a mid-major and get to the power conferences where he would have more resources and more NIL? Possibly. And South Carolina's looking for a coach. Tom Walter, more resources at South Carolina than Wake Forest. Chris Pollard, more resources at South Carolina than Duke. But what if these don't jive? You got Monty Lee, the interim head coach here. There's a lot of talk Monty would take the gig in a heartbeat. But let's go to our Twitter X poll real quick. Something we haven't investigated enough. Right now, Cliff Godwin leads the way in our final poll. 44% of the vote. Josh Elander, the assistant head coach at Tennessee, is second at 30%. Chris Pollard, Duke, 18. Chris Lemonis, Mississippi State, 8. There's been no talk of Chris Lemonis like these others. Let's throw Josh Elander's name out for a minute when we talk about that text. Elander, a lot of credit for what's going on at Tennessee. They say he has been quite vital to the success of the Volunteers. Let's say you get to where Pollard's not let's say the Pollard thing, the Godwin thing, the Walter thing aren't working. You've got Monty, and then you have Josh Elander. Let's say, then do you go and you promote Monty, who has been a head coach in 2 other stops, with a certain level of success, but not the success that you want to get to eventually, or a guy who has been the top lieutenant at a program that has gotten to the success? Because, Monty was an assistant coach here when the Gamecocks were a high-level program as well. It's a very interesting conversation, and we're run out of time, so we have to stop talking about it. Ed Bird, fine job, my friend, like always. Made me sound smarter than I really am. Jay and Elijah, the post-game show, coming up next here on The Game in Columbia, Florence, and Myrtle Beach.